The silence that hung in the air was thick with anticipation. Across the galaxy, countless species had gathered in secret locations to prepare for the final confrontation with the Varg. Leaders and military commanders convened in war councils, their faces grim as they discussed tactics, strategies, and alliances that could help them survive this unimaginable threat. For years, the Varg had been an unstoppable force, leaving nothing but ruins in their wake. The galaxy's largest and most advanced fleets, alien warships that had been crafted over millennia, had been systematically shattered by the Varg's unknown weaponry. The Varg didn't follow the rules of engagement. They didn't adhere to conventional war tactics, where other species relied on fleet formations, missile volleys, and shields. The Varg employed devastating particle cannons, self-replicating drones, and energy fields that seemed impervious to anything the galaxy's best minds could throw at them. Despite the devastating losses, the Allied forces had managed to scrape together one final desperate plan. Every major species had sent their most experienced generals and warships into a single strike force, an armada designed to strike at the heart of the Varg's base of operations deep in their territory. It was a calculated risk. If the Varg couldn't be defeated here, then the galaxy was lost. As the ships gathered in formation near the edge of Varg space, communications were scrambled, and fleet commanders worked feverishly to coordinate their assault. No one spoke about it aloud, but there was a sense of inevitability hanging over the meeting rooms. Every leader knew this would be their last stand. The Alliance had lost too much, and the Varg had proven time and again that they could not be stopped by traditional means. And then, just as everything seemed set in motion, the unexpected happened. A transmission crackled through the communication channels, a human signal. The voice was calm, authoritative, and unmistakably human. "Attention, Galaxy forces. This is Admiral Clara Hayes of the Terran Defense Fleet. We have arrived." There was a stunned silence in the war rooms across the galaxy. Human ships. The humans had been in seclusion for centuries, and no one had heard from them since they retreated behind their borders after their last skirmish with the Xyrix Empire. How could they have possibly known about the war? And even if they did, how could they contribute when their fleet had been so small, so outdated compared to the might of the galaxy's combined forces? Admiral Hayes's voice cut through the silence, more confident now. "We've been monitoring the Varg for years. We know their tactics, their technology, and we've developed new methods of combat. We're not here as a mere backup. We're here to win. Prepare to see what humanity is capable of." Across the galaxy, the message was met with confusion, skepticism, and disbelief. Who were these humans, really? They were nothing compared to the ancient empires that had ruled the stars for millennia. Their technology was crude in comparison, and their military history sparse. But even as doubts settled in, something unexpected happened. A small fleet of ships, sleek, modular, and far smaller than anything the galaxy had ever seen, dropped out of warp speed. They didn't announce their arrival with flashy displays of power or intimidation. Instead, the human ships moved with precision and purpose, quietly taking their place alongside the larger fleets. And then, in an unexpected display of calculated arrogance, the humans launched a sudden and calculated attack against a Varg scouting fleet that had been lurking on the edge of the Allied armada. The humans struck fast and without warning, deploying weapons that no one had seen before. Sharp, calculated blasts that disrupted the Varg's shields, sending their ships into disarray. The galaxy's forces watched in stunned silence as the human fleet wiped out the Varg scouts with an efficiency and speed that defied all expectations. For the first time since the Varg had arrived, the galaxy's forces felt a glimmer of hope. The galaxy's leadership was still reeling from the unexpected efficiency of humanity's first strike. The small human fleet had dispatched the Varg scouts so swiftly, so decisively, that it seemed like a dream. No one had expected this level of competence from a species that had been assumed to be far behind the major galactic powers. The humans' method of battle was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, and it made even the most battle-hardened commanders reconsider their assumptions about humanity. Admiral Clara Hayes stood in her command chair aboard the flagship Sovereign's Resolve, eyes fixed on the tactical map of the system. The human fleet, although smaller than the massive warships of their galactic allies, was proving to be a powerful force. Their ships, sleek and modular, were designed for mobility and versatility rather than brute force. The advanced Varg scouts, with all their firepower and intimidating design, had been no match for the humans' precision. The message that Admiral Hayes had sent earlier, detailing humanity's knowledge of the Varg's technology and their new weapons, was still fresh in the minds of the galaxy's leaders. A large transmission conference was being set up, with representatives from the Xyrix Empire, the Rokan Confederacy, and the Shorek Dominion, along with human representatives. The mood in the room was tense, even hostile at times. Some of the alien leaders were reluctant to fully embrace humanity, their pride too large to allow the newcomers to take too much credit. Others feared the consequences of underestimating them. As the meeting began, the alien leaders were quick to question Admiral Hayes' forces. "You have proven capable in a skirmish, but can you stand against the Varg in a full-scale battle?" One of the Xyrix generals scoffed. "You're untested in this war. Your ships are too small. Your tactics are unproven." Admiral Hayes, standing confidently at the table, exchanged a quick glance with her officers. She wasn't here to make friends, nor to pander to egos. She was here to win. "We don't need to match the Varg's firepower head-on," she replied, her voice steady. "What we need is flexibility. You're relying on a conventional war strategy. The Varg don't play by those rules. We've already seen that. Our tactics are designed to exploit their weaknesses, not meet them in a head-on collision." The room fell silent, and the representatives from the other species exchanged uneasy glances. They hadn't expected the humans to be so bold. But there was something compelling about Admiral Hayes' words, something they couldn't deny. They had been losing the war for too long, and perhaps, just perhaps, humanity could offer the breakthrough they so desperately needed. One of the Shorek leaders, a large reptilian figure who had been silent until now, spoke up. "If you want us to follow your lead, you must prove your worth. The Varg are merciless. They don't care about tactics or negotiations. They destroy, and they move on. Show us your strategy. Show us you have something that can turn the tide." Admiral Hayes nodded, sensing the gravity of the moment. "We will. But we're not here to do this alone. We came here because we believe in something bigger than our individual species. We believe that the galaxy can stand united against the Varg. Humanity may be new to this fight, but we don't back down. We stand, and we fight, together." Her words hung in the air, the weight of them shifting something in the room. The alien leaders remained skeptical, but their expressions had softened. There was something raw and unyielding about humanity's resolve, something that seemed to touch a chord even in the most jaded of them. The Rokan Command. The human fleet's first major test came sooner than anyone anticipated. After the tense meeting with the galactic leaders, a Varg battle group was detected on the move. The Varg had struck another critical system, a vital trade hub that provided resources to several of the galaxy's strongest factions. The Varg, confident in their dominance, had begun to attack key systems with even greater frequency. The galaxy's united fleets, still reeling from previous defeats, were scrambling to respond, but the Varg were always one step ahead. Their ships were faster, their weapons more advanced, and their tactics unpredictable. The allied species, despite their size and strength, had been unable to keep up. It was clear to all that traditional warfare would not win this fight. That's when Admiral Hayes saw her opening. Humanity had learned from the enemy. They had studied the Varg's patterns, their technology, and the psychological methods they used to break their enemies. The Varg thrived on terror, overwhelming firepower, superior numbers, and total devastation. But humanity's greatest strength, Hayes knew, was adaptability. Where others saw a dead end, humans saw a way forward. The plan was audacious. The human fleet would take the lead in an attack on the Varg battle group, using guerrilla tactics and surprise as their primary weapons. The larger alien fleets would follow behind, but only after humanity made their move. It was a high-risk operation. If the Varg caught wind of the trap, the humans would be decimated. If they didn't, it might just be the turning point that the galaxy needed. The first stage of the operation involved luring the Varg into a decoy system, one with an asteroid field and a moon that could serve as a natural shield. The human ships, small and nimble, would dart in and out of the asteroid field, drawing the Varg's attention while avoiding their primary weapons. They would strike quickly, disrupting the Varg's shields with specialized energy pulse bombs that were designed to create brief openings in their defenses. The human ships were vulnerable, but their speed and maneuverability were unparalleled, and they would use that to their advantage. The rest of the Allied fleet would wait, hidden in the shadows of the moon, ready to strike once the Varg were distracted. It was a strategy unlike any the galaxy's leaders had ever used. They were used to head-on battles, to overwhelming firepower. But humanity's plan was one of deception and misdirection, a delicate dance with death that required absolute precision. As the operation began, the human fleet moved into position. The first phase of the attack was flawless. The Varg fleet, overconfident and eager for a kill, took the bait. The human ships danced through the asteroid field, releasing their pulse bombs and leaving chaos in their wake. For the first time, the Varg were on the defensive. They tried to lock on with their advanced targeting systems, but the humans were too fast, weaving through the asteroids with expert precision. The first wave of the victory over the Varg battle group sent shockwaves through the galaxy. It was more than just a tactical success. It was a morale boost, a validation of humanity's methods, and a rallying point for the galaxy's fractured forces. For the first time, the galaxy's leaders were forced to reckon with the reality that the humans might hold the key to defeating the Varg. But despite the triumph, the Varg were far from finished. They didn't take defeat lightly, and their retaliation was swift. Within days, new Varg fleets, larger and more heavily armed, began emerging from deep space. The message was clear. Humanity's first victory had only angered the Varg, and they were coming back with a vengeance. Admiral Hayes knew that the battle for the galaxy was far from over. But the human success had created a ripple effect among the other species. The once skeptical alien fleets, who had been reluctant to fully integrate humanity into their military operations, were now more open to cooperation. The battle strategy that humanity had pioneered, hit-and-run attacks, clever traps, and overwhelming precision, was gaining traction. Other species began adopting human tactics, supplementing their massive fleets with smaller, faster ships that could deploy in ways they had never imagined. The next major confrontation came sooner than expected. A large Varg fleet, numbering over 300 ships, was moving toward the heavily populated system of Edrax. The system was vital to the Rokan Confederacy, a major supplier of energy and raw materials to the galaxy's war efforts. If the Varg took control of Edrax, they would gain a strategic foothold in the heart of the galaxy, crippling the Alliance's ability to wage war. The Allied fleets, now including human ships, prepared to meet the Varg head-on in what would be their largest confrontation yet. The stakes were higher than ever before. Victory would mean the preservation of the Alliance's strength, while defeat would give the Varg an insurmountable advantage. Admiral Hayes took her position once again as the leader of the human forces. The plan was simple but dangerous. Humanity's forces would take the lead in a surprise ambush. The humans, with their now well-practiced guerrilla tactics, would move into the heart of the system, using the dense asteroid fields and nearby moons for cover. The Varg, unaware of the trap, would march straight into a war zone. The battle began with a bang. The Varg fleet, as expected, moved forward with overwhelming force, its sheer size intimidating. The Allied fleet, led by the humans, was smaller in comparison, but every ship was strategically placed to maximize its impact. As the Varg ships entered the system, the human fleet launched their first wave, emerging from behind asteroids and attacking in unison, striking at the weakest points of the Varg formation. What followed was chaos. The Varg fleet, already disoriented by the human ambush, struggled to regroup. The humans, fast and precise, moved like shadows, striking with pinpoint accuracy before disappearing into the surrounding asteroid fields. The Varg, used to overwhelming force and frontal attacks, were completely out of their element. The human ships zipped in and out of the battle, disrupting the Varg supply lines and knocking out crucial command ships. For the first time in the war, the Varg were in retreat. The Allied fleet, now emboldened by the human success, launched their full assault, converging on the Varg from all sides. With their command ships disabled and their forces fractured, the Varg couldn't maintain their formation. What had once seemed like an unstoppable juggernaut was now a disjointed, panicked fleet. The battle lasted for hours, but when the dust settled, the results were undeniable. The Varg had been defeated. Over half of their fleet had been destroyed, and the remaining ships had retreated into the depths of space. The battle for Edrax had been won, and the galaxy had its first true major victory against the Varg. Admiral Hayes stood on the bridge of the Sovereign's Resolve, watching the aftermath unfold on the holographic map. The loss of the Varg fleet was a significant blow to their war effort, but she knew this victory wouldn't end the conflict. The Varg would return, as they always did, with new tactics, new fleets, and more fury. But humanity had shown the galaxy what they were capable of, and more importantly, what they could become when united with others in the fight for survival. This was no longer a war for mere survival. It was a war for the future of the galaxy, and humanity, once underestimated and dismissed, had firmly cemented its place as the key to victory. The victory at Edrax was a turning point, but it also came with its own set of challenges. The galaxy's leaders, once skeptical, now looked to humanity not just as a new ally, but as the key to winning this war. The human fleet's guerrilla tactics, honed through years of isolation, had proved highly effective, and for the first time, the Allied fleets began to consider integrating humanity's methods into their own military strategies. Admiral Hayes and her officers were still recovering from the adrenaline of the Edrax victory when word came in of a new development. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Varg were massing an even larger fleet, one capable of overwhelming the remaining forces of the galaxy in a single strike. The Varg were learning, adapting. They no longer relied solely on brute force. They had begun to incorporate tactics similar to the humans' hit-and-run approach. They were evolving. The galaxy's command structure, still reeling from the loss of so many ships, was in disarray. The Allied forces needed time to recover, to rebuild their shattered fleets. But time was the one thing they didn't have. The Varg were already on the move, and if they attacked the heart of the galaxy now, it could all be over. Admiral Hayes gathered her team for an emergency strategy session. The holographic display showed the Varg fleet, vast and ominous, moving toward a system near the center of the galaxy, a key hub for trade and communication. If the Varg destroyed it, the galaxy's ability to communicate, coordinate, and supply its fleets would collapse. This was more than just a military target. It was the lifeline of the galaxy's resistance. "How much time do we have before they arrive?" asked General Kale, the Rokan commander who had become a close ally. "At most, 3 standard days," Hayes replied, her voice steady. "We can't wait for reinforcements. We have to hit them before they reach the system." The room fell silent. 3 days was not nearly enough time to prepare, especially considering the new Varg tactics. Hayes had no illusions about the difficulty of the task ahead. This wasn't just another skirmish. It was a battle for the future of the galaxy. "We need to get ahead of them," Hayes continued, tapping the controls to pull up a map of the system. "The Varg are predictable in their aggression. They'll send out a vanguard fleet to probe ahead of their main force. If we intercept it before they can link up with the main fleet, we can disrupt their plans and slow them down long enough for the rest of our forces to arrive. General Kale nodded. We'll need to hit fast and hard, just like we did at Adrax. But the stakes are higher. We'll be up against the core of their fleet this time, not just scouts. Hayes turned to her communications officer. Get the rest of the Alliance ready. We need every ship we can muster. We'll take the lead, but everyone will need to be in position to back us up when the Varg arrive. No room for error. The final preparations were frantic. With 3 days until the Varg vanguard arrived, the Allied fleets began to mobilize, coordinating their movements with an urgency never seen before. The humans, with their smaller but more agile ships, were once again tasked with leading the charge. The strategy was the same as before: surprise, speed, and precision. But this time, there was no room for mistakes. The entire galaxy was counting on them. As the battle drew closer, Admiral Hayes gathered her fleet on the bridge of the Sovereign's Resolve. "This is our moment," she said, her voice firm. "We've already shown the galaxy what we're capable of. Now, we're going to prove that we can finish this." The human fleet moved into position, hidden in the asteroid belt near the edge of the system. They were smaller and outnumbered, but their resolve was unshakable. They would strike first, and they would strike hard. Moments before the Varg vanguard appeared, Hayes felt the weight of what they were about to face. It wasn't just another battle. It was the defining moment of humanity's place in the galaxy. Failure wasn't an option, not with so much at stake. As the first Varg ships blinked into the system, humanity was ready. The trap was set, and the battle for the heart of the galaxy had begun. The Varg vanguard entered the system with the relentless precision that had become their trademark. Massive warships, sleek and powerful, moved like a swarm of locusts, each ship carrying enough firepower to obliterate entire cities. Their objective was clear: secure the system and pave the way for the larger fleet that would soon follow. The humans, hidden within the asteroid belt, were ready. The plan was simple but perilous: disrupt the Vanguard's advance, then fade into the shadows before the main Varg force arrived. It was a game of cat and mouse, one that could either buy the galaxy precious time or end in catastrophic failure. Admiral Hayes watched the tactical screen, her fingers hovering over the command interface. Her officers were calm, but she knew that beneath the surface, every one of them felt the weight of the moment. This was no longer a small skirmish. It was a battle for survival. "Remember," Hayes said, her voice low but resolute, "we strike fast, we strike hard, and we disappear. We can't afford to engage them head-on for long. Our job is to slow them down, not to win this fight outright. We just need to keep them from linking up with their main fleet." The hum of the ship's engines quieted as the Sovereign's Resolve and its allied fleet slipped into position. All eyes were on the incoming Varg ships. The Varg had no idea the humans were waiting in ambush. The enemy ships moved forward, scanning for anything out of the ordinary, but the asteroid field cloaked the Allied ships perfectly. The first strike came suddenly, like a lightning bolt. The human fleet emerged from the asteroid field in a coordinated burst of fire, catching the Varg off guard. Specialized pulse bombs tore through the shields of the lead ships, creating massive shockwaves. Smaller human ships, agile and fast, darted in and out of range, planting mines and disabling enemy engines with pinpoint laser strikes. The Varg, momentarily stunned, retaliated with the speed and ferocity they were known for. Their larger ships unleashed devastating bursts of energy, trying to overwhelm the humans. But humanity's fleet wasn't there to stand and fight. They struck and vanished, like ghosts in the dark, leaving the Varg ships scrambling to adapt. "Keep it up," Hayes ordered. "Don't give them a moment to regroup. Disrupt their formations, target their command ships." Human ships were taking hits, but their small size and agility kept them alive long enough to inflict damage. It was the perfect hit-and-run tactic. Each successful strike, each enemy ship disabled or destroyed, bought precious moments for the galaxy's larger fleets to arrive. But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the Varg were learning quickly. They adapted their tactics, attempting to trap the human ships in the asteroid field with their own advanced maneuvering. A Varg warship, larger and more powerful than the rest, emerged from the chaos, cutting a direct path toward the Sovereign's resolve. The massive ship fired a concentrated energy beam, smashing through the nearby asteroids as it aimed straight for the human flagship. "Brace for impact," shouted Lieutenant Riva, her eyes wide as the enormous beam of energy lit up the screen. Hayes didn't flinch. "Move us out of its line of fire. We can't afford to be caught in a slugfest." The Sovereign's resolve banked sharply, narrowly avoiding the beam. The burst of energy from the human fleet's cannons struck the Varg ship, but it was far from enough to halt its advance. The battle was intensifying, and the time to execute the next phase of the plan was rapidly approaching. Just as the Varg ship closed in, a blip appeared on the radar. Reinforcements. The larger Allied fleets had arrived, led by the Rokan and Shorik ships, massive and imposing. They emerged from behind the moon and moved into formation, flanking the Varg vanguard. The battle had shifted. Humanity's guerrilla tactics had slowed the Varg down long enough for the full Allied fleet to join the fray. The Varg, now caught between the human forces and the larger fleets, found themselves trapped in a pincer move. But even then, the Varg refused to give up easily. They regrouped, rallying their ships for one final desperate push. Hayes watched the unfolding chaos on the tactical screen. The Varg had been caught off guard, but they were relentless. There was no guarantee the battle would end in their favor, even with the odds now in their favor. "Now," Hayes said, a spark of resolve in her eyes. "We finish this." With the Allied forces closing in, the battle reached its peak. The Varg had been outmaneuvered, but their fury had not yet subsided. Humanity and the galaxy's forces would need to give everything they had to secure a true victory. The battle raged on as the human fleet, alongside their Allied forces, pushed the Varg to the edge. The galaxy's fleets, once disjointed and uncertain, had found a rhythm. The human strategy had been proven once more, swift, calculated, and deadly. Now, with the Varg trapped between the human ships and the reinforcements, the fight was reaching its most critical moment. Admiral Hayes watched from the bridge of the Sovereign's resolve as enemy fire lit up the void around her. The Varg vanguard was breaking apart, but their retaliation was still relentless. For every Varg ship that fell, two more seemed to appear, closing in from every direction. The Varg were wounded, but they were not defeated. They would fight to the last. "Keep the pressure on them," Hayes commanded. "Do not let them regroup. We can't let them pull back." The human fleet had already lost several ships in the skirmish, though they had inflicted far more damage on the Varg. The Sovereign's resolve herself had taken a few hits, but the shields had held strong. Barely. The human ships continued their swift movements, weaving in and out of fire, as they wore down the Varg ships piece by piece. But the Varg were learning. Their larger ships, now more coordinated, began to use their superior numbers to encircle the human vessels, forcing them into tighter and more dangerous spaces. The asteroid belt that had once been an advantage now seemed like a trap. If the Varg could just corner them, they would wipe out humanity's best hope. "We've got to break through," Hayes muttered to herself. Her mind raced. The Varg were too tough to overpower with brute force alone, but they had weaknesses. Their command structure was rigid, and if they could sever it, the entire fleet might falter. "Lieutenant Riva," Hayes called. "Can we get a lock on their flagship?" Riva, eyes glued to the tactical screen, nodded sharply. "Yes, Admiral. It's a vulnerable target right now, isolated in the rear of the formation." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Take the shot. Target their command center. Full power." The Sovereign's resolve steadied itself, the hum of its weapon systems charging up. For a moment, everything else on the battlefield seemed to fade away. Hayes focused only on the flagship, the Varg's heart. If they could destroy it, the rest of the fleet would collapse like a house of cards. A pulse of energy tore through space. The beam struck the Varg flagship with a violent explosion that lit up the darkness. The flagship's shields shimmered under the attack, but they held for a split second longer than expected, before finally buckling under the concentrated assault. A moment later, the flagship exploded in a massive fireball. The destruction of the Varg command ship sent shockwaves through the battlefield. The Varg, caught in the middle of a chaotic retreat and disoriented by the loss of their leadership, began to falter. Their coordinated movements broke down into a disorganized scramble. The once mighty fleet now seemed fragile, like a broken beast struggling to survive. "That's it," General Kale shouted from across the communications channel. "They're falling apart." Hayes couldn't afford to relax, though. The Varg were dangerous even in disarray, and the battle wasn't won yet. "Keep pressing forward," she ordered. "Don't let them recover." The Allied fleets, now sensing victory, closed in on the retreating Varg ships. The humans, still using their guerrilla tactics, harassed the enemy from every angle, preventing them from regrouping. The massive Varg vessels were still formidable, but without leadership, their once imposing strength was dissipating. As the Varg ships began to scatter, Hayes couldn't help but feel a rush of relief. For a brief moment, victory seemed within reach. The human fleet had done what no one thought was possible. They had struck the heart of the Varg, crippled their command, and turned the tide in favor of the galaxy. But even as the enemy ships fled, Hayes knew that the battle was not truly over. The Varg were relentless, and they would regroup. The war was far from finished. As the final Varg ships disappeared into the depths of space, the Allied fleets, battered but triumphant, regrouped. The system was safe, for now. But this victory marked the beginning of something far larger. Humanity had proven its worth in the most brutal way possible, and now, more than ever, the galaxy would look to them as the true leaders of this resistance. "We've taken a step forward," Hayes said, her voice steady. "But the real fight is just beginning." The aftermath of the battle was overwhelming. The galaxy's forces, battered and bruised, had emerged victorious, but at a high cost. Hundreds of ships had been lost, and thousands of soldiers, pilots, and crew members had given their lives. Yet despite the staggering casualties, there was no question about the outcome. The Varg vanguard had been broken, their command structure decimated, and their morale shattered. It was a victory that no one had dared to believe possible. Admiral Hayes stood in the war room aboard the Sovereign's Resolve, staring at the tactical map that illuminated the space before her. The Varg fleet had been forced to retreat deep into uncharted regions, and their immediate threat had been quelled. But the war was far from over. This victory, while significant, was only a small piece of the larger puzzle. The Varg would regroup, learn from their mistakes, and come back stronger. "Admiral, we've received reports from the Rokan and Shorik fleets," General Kale said, his voice breaking through her thoughts. "The Varg have already begun reinforcing their strongholds in the outer regions. They'll be rebuilding faster than we can hope to follow." Hayes nodded, her gaze never leaving the holographic map. The galaxy's defensive lines were more secure than they had been before, but the Varg were nothing if not resilient. The war had only shifted in their favor for a moment. She couldn't afford to be complacent. "What's the status on our reinforcements?" she asked, turning to her fleet's logistical officer. "We've managed to secure some reinforcements from the outer systems," the officer replied, "but it will take at least a few weeks before they're in position. We're also requesting support from the other galactic factions, but many of them are still recovering from the recent engagements." "We don't have weeks," Hayes said, her voice hardening. "We need to press the advantage now before they have time to reorganize. We can't let them regain their momentum. If we do, we'll be right back where we started." The room fell silent as everyone understood the gravity of the situation. They'd won the battle, but they were far from winning the war. The galaxy's leaders had always underestimated humanity, But now, with the human fleet at the forefront of the galaxy's defense, that perception was changing. There was a new sense of hope, but also pressure. Humanity could no longer afford to play a secondary role. The galaxy was counting on them. Admiral Hayes took a deep breath, refocusing. All right, we'll initiate a counteroffensive. We'll strike at their outer fortifications, disrupt their supply lines, and slow down their reinforcements. The Varg think they can rebuild quickly, but they won't if we can hit them hard and fast. General Kale spoke up. We've learned a lot about their weaknesses, especially their reliance on central command hubs. If we target their remaining leadership posts, we can cripple their ability to organize any kind of effective resistance. Exactly, Hayes said. We'll coordinate with the Allied fleets and launch a series of precision strikes. No major engagements, just surgical strikes to destabilize their positions. We'll use the same tactics we've perfected, hit them where it hurts, and leave before they can react. The crew nodded, recognizing that this would be the only way to keep the Varg on the defensive. If they allowed the enemy to regroup fully, the war would only get harder. The galaxy's fleets were exhausted, but the Varg would not wait for them to rest. It was time to keep pushing, to keep the pressure on. Hayes turned back to the tactical map. We have one chance to make this work. The Varg are dangerous when cornered. We need to hit them with everything we've got and make sure they never recover. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's about ending this war, once and for all. As the officers began to prepare their fleets for the upcoming campaign, Hayes felt the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her. Humanity had become the backbone of the galaxy's resistance, and with that came expectations that no one had imagined even a year ago. The tides of war had shifted, but the battle was far from won. Her thoughts drifted briefly to the men and women who had fought and died in the past weeks, their sacrifice driving her forward. They had proven that humanity could fight and win against seemingly insurmountable odds. But this was just the beginning. The real test lay ahead. I'll be on the front lines, Hayes said, more to herself than to anyone else. We'll do this together.